Section 29 of Coningsby, or the New Generation, by Benjamin Disraeli. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 8, Chapter 6. What a great man was the Right Honourable Nicholas Rigby! Here was one of the first peers of England, and one of the finest ladies in London, both waiting with equal anxiety his return to town, and unable to transact two affairs of vast importance, yet wholly unconnected, without his interposition. What was the secret of the influence of this man, confided in by everybody, trusted by none? His counsels were not deep, his expedients were not felicitous. He had no feeling, and he could create no sympathy. It is that, in most of the transactions of life, there is some portion which no one cares to accomplish, and which everybody wishes to be achieved. This was always the portion of Mr. Rigby. In the eye of the world he had constantly the appearance of being mixed up with high dealings, and negotiations, and arrangements of fine management, whereas in truth, notwithstanding his splendid livery and the airs he gave himself in the servants' hall, his real business in life had ever been to do the dirty work. Mr. Rigby had been shut up much at his villa of late. He was concocting, you could not term it composing, an article, a very slashing article, which was to prove that the penny postage must be the destruction of the aristocracy. It was a grand subject, treated in his highest style. His parallel portraits of Rowland Hill, the conqueror of Almarez, and Rowland Hill, the deviser of the cheap postage, were enormously fine. It was full of passages in italics, little words in great capitals, and almost drew tears. The statistical details also were highly interesting and novel. Several of the old postmen, both Twopenny and General, who had been in office with himself, and who were inspired with an equal zeal against that spirit of reform of which they had alike been victims, supplied him with information which nothing but a breach of ministerial duty could have furnished. The prophetic peroration as to the irresistible progress of democracy was almost as powerful as one of Rigby's speeches on Aldborough or Amersham. There never was a fellow for giving a good hearty kick to the people like Rigby. Himself sprung from the dregs of the populace, this was disinterested. What could be more patriotic and magnanimous than his jeremiads over the fall of the Montmorency and the Crillons, or the possible catastrophe of the Percys and the Manners? The truth of all this hullabaloo was that Rigby had a sly pension, which by an inevitable association of ideas he always connected with the maintenance of an aristocracy. All his rigmarole dissertations on the French Revolution were impelled by this secret influence, and when he wailed over La Guerre au Château, and moaned like a mandrake over Nottingham Castle in flames, the rogue had an eye all the while to quarter day. Arriving in town the day after Coningsby's interview with his grandfather, Mr. Rigby found a summons to Monmouth House waiting him, and an urgent note from Lucretia begging that he would permit nothing to prevent him from seeing her for a few minutes before he called on the Marquess. Lucretia, acting on the unconscious intimation of Flora, had in the course of 24 hours obtained pretty ample and accurate details of the cause of contention between Coningsby and her husband. She could inform Mr. Rigby not only that Lord Monmouth was highly incensed against his grandson, but that the cause of their misunderstanding arose about a seat in the House of Commons, and that seat, too, the one which Mr. Rigby had long appropriated to himself, and over whose registration he had watched with such affectionate solicitude. Lady Monmouth arranged this information like a first-rate artist, and gave it a grouping and a colour which produced the liveliest effect upon her confederate. The countenance of Rigby was almost ghastly as he received the intelligence. A grin, half of malice, half of terror, played over his features. 'I told you to beware of him long ago,' said Lady Monmouth. 'He has ever been, in the way of both of us.' 'He is in my power,' said Rigby. 'We can crush him.' 'How?' 'He is in love with the daughter of Millbank, the man who bought Hellingsley.' 'Ha!' exclaimed Lady Monmouth, in a prolonged tone. "He was at Coningsby all last summer, hanging about her. I found the younger Millbank quite domiciliated at the Castle; a fact which, of itself, if known to Lord Monmouth, would ensure the lad's annihilation." "And you kept this fine news for a winter campaign, my good Mr. Rigby," said Lady Monmouth with a subtle smile. "It was a weapon of service. I give you my compliments." "The time is not always ripe," said Mr. Rigby. "But it is now most mature. Let us not conceal it from ourselves that since his first visit to Coningsby we have neither of us really been in the same position which we then occupied or believed we should occupy. My lord, though you would scarcely believe it, has a weakness for this boy; and though I by my marriage, and you by your zealous ability, have apparently secured a permanent hold upon his habits, I have never doubted when the crisis comes we shall find that the golden fruit is plucked by one who has not watched over the garden. You take me? There is no reason why we two should clash together. We can both of us find what we want, and more securely, if we work in company." "I trust my devotion to you has never been doubted, dear madam." "Nor to yourself, dear Mr. Rigby. Go now, the game is before you. Rid me of this Coningsby, and I will secure you all that you want. Doubt not me, there is no reason. I want a firm ally. There must be two." "It shall be done," said Rigby. "It must be done. If once the notion gets wind that one of the Castle family may perchance stand for Darlford, all the present combinations will be disorganised. It must be done at once. I know that the government will dissolve." "So I hear for certain," said Lucretia. "Be sure there is no time to lose. What does he want with you to day?" "I know not; there are so many things." "To be sure; and yet I cannot doubt he will speak of this quarrel. Let not the occasion be lost. Whatever his mood, the subject may be introduced. If good, you will guide him more easily; if dark, the love for the Hellingsley girl, the fact of the brother being in his castle, drinking his wine, riding his horses, ordering about his servants, you will omit no details. A Millbank quite at home at Coningsby will lash him to madness. 'Tis quite ripe. Not a word that you have seen me. Go, go, or he may hear that you have arrived. I shall be home all morning. It will be but gallant that you should pay me a little visit when you have transacted your business. You understand? Au revoir." Lady Monmouth took up again her French novel, but her eyes soon glanced over the page, unattached by its contents. Her own existence was too interesting to find any excitement in fiction. It was nearly 3 years since her marriage. That great step which she had ever had a conviction was to lead to results still greater. Of late she had often been filled with a presentiment that they were near at hand; never more so than on this day. Irresistible was the current of associations that led her to meditate on freedom, wealth, power; on a career which should at the same time dazzle the imagination and gratify her heart. Notwithstanding the gossip of Paris, founded on no authentic knowledge of her husband's character or information, based on the haphazard observations of the floating multitude, Lucretia herself had no reason to fear that her influence over Lord Monmouth, if exerted, was materially diminished. But satisfied that he had formed no other tie, with her ever the test of her position, she had not thought it expedient, and certainly would have found it irksome, to maintain that influence by any ostentatious means. She knew that Lord Monmouth was capricious, easily wearied, soon palled; and that on men who have no affections, affection has no hold. Their passions or their fancies, on the contrary, as it seemed to her, are rather stimulated by neglect or indifference, provided that they are not systematic; and the circumstance of a wife being admired by one who is not her husband sometimes wonderfully revives the passion or renovates the respect of him who should be devoted to her. The health of Lord Monmouth was the subject which never was long absent from the vigilance or the meditation of Lucretia. She was well assured that his life was no longer secure. She knew that after their marriage he had made a will, which secured to her a large portion of his great wealth in case of their having no issue; and after the accident at Paris, all hope in that respect was over. Recently the extreme anxiety which Lord Monmouth had evinced about terminating the abeyance of the barony to which his first wife was a co-heiress, in favour of his grandson, had alarmed Lucretia. To establish in the land another branch of the house of Coningsby was evidently the last excitement of Lord Monmouth, and perhaps a permanent one. If the idea were once accepted, notwithstanding the limit to its endowment which Lord Monmouth might at the first start contemplate, Lucretia had sufficiently studied his temperament to be convinced that all his energies and all his resources would ultimately be devoted to its practical fulfilment. Her original prejudice against Coningsby and jealousy of his influence had therefore of late been considerably aggravated; and the intelligence that for the first time there was a misunderstanding between Coningsby and her husband filled her with excitement and hope. She knew her lord well enough to feel assured that the cause for displeasure in the present instance could not be a light one. She resolved instantly to labour that it should not be transient; and it so happened that she had applied for aid in this endeavour to the very individual in whose power it rested to accomplish all her desire, while in doing so he felt at the same time he was defending his own position and advancing his own interests. Lady Monmouth was now waiting with some excitement the return of Mr. Rigby. His interview with his patron was of unusual length. An hour, and more than an hour, had elapsed. Lady Monmouth again threw aside the book which more than once she had discarded. She paced the room, restless rather than disquieted. She had complete confidence in Rigby's ability for the occasion; and with her knowledge of Lord Monmouth's character, she could not contemplate the possibility of failure if the circumstances were adroitly introduced to his consideration. Still time stole on. The harassing and exhausting process of suspense was acting on her nervous system. She began to think that Rigby had not found the occasion favourable for the catastrophe; that Lord Monmouth, from apprehension of disturbing Rigby and entailing explanations on himself, had avoided the necessary communication; that her skilful combination for the moment had missed. 2 hours had now elapsed, and Lucretia, in a state of considerable irritation, was about to inquire whether Mr. Rigby were there with his lordship, when the door of her boudoir opened, and that gentleman appeared. 'How long you have been!' exclaimed Lady Monmouth. 'Now sit down, and tell me what has passed.' Lady Monmouth pointed to the seat which Flora had occupied. 'I thank your Ladyship,' said Mr. Rigby, with a somewhat grave and yet perplexed expression of countenance, and seating himself at some little distance from his companion, 'but I am very well here.' There was a pause. Instead of responding to the invitation of Lady Monmouth to communicate with his usual readiness and volubility, Mr. Rigby was silent, and, if it were possible to use such an expression with regard to such a gentleman, apparently embarrassed. 'Well,' said Lady Monmouth, 'does he know about the Millbanks?' 'Everything,' said Mr. Rigby. 'And what did he say?' 'His Lordship was greatly shocked,' replied Mr. Rigby, with a pious expression of features. 'Such monstrous ingratitude! As his Lordship very justly observed, it is impossible to say what is going on under my own roof, or to what I can trust.' 'But he made an exception in your favour, I dare say, my dear Mr. Rigby,' said Lady Monmouth. 'Lord Monmouth was pleased to say that I possessed his entire confidence,' said Mr. Rigby, 'and that he looked to me in his difficulties.' 'Very sensible of him. And what is to become of Mr. Coningsby?' 'The steps which his Lordship is about to take with reference to the establishment generally,' said Mr. Rigby, 'will allow the connection that at present subsists between that gentleman and his noble relative, now that Lord Monmouth's eyes are open to his real character, to terminate naturally, without the necessity of any formal explanation.' 'But what do you mean by the steps he is going to take in his establishment generally? Lord Monmouth thinks he requires change of scene.' 'Oh, is he going to drag me abroad again?' exclaimed Lady Monmouth with great impatience. 'Why, not exactly,' said Mr. Rigby, rather demurely. 'I hope he is not going again to that dreadful castle in Lancashire.' 'Lord Monmouth was thinking that, as you were tired of Paris, you might find some of the German baths agreeable.' 'Why, there is nothing that Lord Monmouth dislikes so much as a German bathing place.' 'Exactly,' said Mr. Rigby. 'Then how capricious in him wanting to go to them!' 'He does not want to go to them.' 'What do you mean, Mr. Rigby?' said Lady Monmouth in a lower voice, and looking him full in the face with a glance seldom bestowed. There was a churlish and unusual look about Rigby. It was as if malignant, and yet at the same time a little frightened. He had screwed himself into doggedness. 'I mean what Lord Monmouth means. He suggests that if your Ladyship were to pass the summer at Kissingen, for example, and a paragraph in the Morning Post were to announce that his Lordship was about to join you there, all awkwardness would be removed, and no one could for a moment take the liberty of supposing, even if his Lordship did not ultimately reach you, that anything like a separation had occurred.' 'A separation!' said Lady Monmouth. 'Quite amicable,' said Mr. Rigby. 'I would never have consented to interfere in the affair, but to secure that most desirable point.' 'I will see Lord Monmouth at once,' said Lucretia, rising, her natural pallor aggravated into a ghoul like tint. 'His Lordship has gone out,' said Mr. Rigby, rather stubbornly. 'Our conversation, sir, then finishes. I await his return.' She bowed haughtily. 'His Lordship will never return to Monmouth House again.' Lucretia sprang from the sofa. 'Miserable craven!' she exclaimed. 'Has the cowardly tyrant fled? And he really thinks that I am to be crushed by such an instrument as this? Pah! He may leave Monmouth House, but I shall not. Begone, sir.' 'Still anxious to secure an amicable separation,' said Mr. Rigby, 'your Ladyship must allow me to place the circumstances of the case fairly before your excellent judgment. Lord Monmouth has decided upon a course. You know as well as I that he never swerves from his resolutions. He has left peremptory instructions, and he will listen to no appeal. He has empowered me to represent to your Ladyship that he wishes in every way to consider your convenience. He suggests that everything in short should be arranged as if his Lordship were himself unhappily no more. That your Ladyship should at once enter into your jointure, which shall be made payable quarterly to your order, provided you can find it convenient to live upon the Continent,' added Mr. Rigby with some hesitation. 'And suppose I cannot?' 'Why, then we will leave your Ladyship to the assertion of your rights.' 'We!' 'I beg your Ladyship's pardon. I speak as the friend of the family, the trustee of your marriage settlement, well known also as Lord Monmouth's executor,' said Mr. Rigby, his countenance gradually regaining its usual callous confidence, and some degree of self complacency, as he remembered the good things which he enumerated. 'I have decided,' said Lady Monmouth. 'I will assert my rights. Your master has mistaken my character and his own position. He shall rue the day that he assailed me.' 'I should be sorry if there were any violence,' said Mr. Rigby, 'especially as everything is left to my management and control. An office, indeed, which I only accepted for your mutual advantage. I think, upon reflection, I might put before your Ladyship some considerations which might induce you, on the whole, to be of the opinion that it will be better for us to draw together in this business, as we have hitherto, indeed, throughout an acquaintance of now some years.' Rigby was assuming all his usual tone of brazen familiarity. 'Your self confidence exceeds even Lady Monmouth's estimate of it,' said Lucretia. 'Now, you are unkind. Your Ladyship mistakes my position. I am interfering in this business for your sake. I might have refused the office. It would have fallen to another, who would have fulfilled it without any delicacy and consideration for your feelings. View my interposition in that light, my dear Lady Monmouth, and circumstances will assume altogether a new colour. I beg that you will quit the house, sir.' Mr. Rigby shook his head. 'I would with pleasure to oblige you, were it in my power, but Lord Monmouth has particularly desired that I should take up my residence here permanently. The servants are now my servants. It is useless to ring the bell. For your ladyship's sake, I wish everything to be accomplished with tranquillity, and, if possible, friendliness and good feeling. You can have even a week for the preparations for your departure, if necessary. I will take that upon myself. Any carriages, too, that you desire, your jewels, at least all those that are not at the banker's. The arrangement about your jointure, your letters of credit, even your passport, I will attend to myself, only too happy if by this painful interference I have in any way contributed to soften the annoyance which at the first blush you may naturally experience, but which, like everything else, take my word, will wear off.' 'I shall send for Lord Eskdale,' said Lady Monmouth. 'He is a gentleman.' 'I am quite sure,' said Mr. Rigby, 'that Lord Eskdale will give you the same advice as myself, if he only reads your ladyship's letters,' he added slowly, 'to Prince Trautsmansdorff.' 'My letters?' said Lady Monmouth. 'Pardon me,' said Rigby, putting his hand in his pocket, as if to guard some treasure. 'I have no wish to revive painful associations, but I have them, and I must act upon them if you persist in treating me as a foe, who am in reality your best friend, which indeed I ought to be, having the honour of acting as trustee under your marriage settlement, and having known you so many years.' 'Leave me for the present alone,' said Lady Monmouth. 'Send me my servant, if I have one. I shall not remain here the week which you mention, but quit at once this house, which I wish I had never entered. Adieu, Mr. Rigby. You are now Lord of Monmouth House, and yet I cannot help feeling you too will be discharged before he dies.' Mr. Rigby made Lady Monmouth a bow such as became the master of the house, and then withdrew. Chapter 7. A paragraph in the Morning Post, a few days after his interview with his grandfather, announcing that Lord and Lady Monmouth had quitted town for the baths of Kissingen, startled Coningsby, who called the same day at Monmouth House in consequence. There he learned more authentic details of their unexpected movements. It appeared that Lady Monmouth had certainly departed, and the porter, with a rather sceptical visage, informed Coningsby that Lord Monmouth was to follow, but when he could not tell. At present his Lordship was at Brighton, and in a few days was about to take possession of a villa at Richmond, which had for some time been fitting up for him under the superintendence of Mr. Rigby, who, as Coningsby also learnt, now permanently resided at Monmouth House. All this intelligence made Coningsby ponder. He was sufficiently acquainted with the parties concerned to feel assured that he had not learned the whole truth. What had really taken place, and what was the real cause of the occurrences, were equally mystical to him. All he was convinced of was, that some great domestic revolution had been suddenly effected. Coningsby entertained for his grandfather a sincere affection. With the exception of their last unfortunate interview, he had experienced from Lord Monmouth nothing but kindness, both in phrase and deed. There was also something in Lord Monmouth, when he pleased it, rather fascinating to young men; and as Coningsby had never occasioned him any feelings but pleasurable ones, he was always disposed to make himself delightful to his grandson. The experience of a consummate man of the world, advanced in life, detailed without rigidity to youth, with frankness and facility, is bewitching. Lord Monmouth was never garrulous; he was always pithy, and could be picturesque. He revealed a character in a sentence, and detected the ruling passion with the hand of a master. Besides, he had seen everybody, and had done everything. and though, on the whole, too indolent for conversation, and loving to be talked to, these were circumstances which made his too rare communications the more precious. With these feelings, Coningsby resolved, the moment that he learned that his grandfather was established at Richmond, to pay him a visit. He was informed that Lord Monmouth was at home, and he was shown into a drawing room, where he found two French ladies in their bonnets, whom he soon discovered to be actresses. They also had come down to pay a visit to his grandfather, and were by no means displeased to pass the interval that must elapse before they had that pleasure in chatting with his grandson. Coningsby found them extremely amusing, with the finest spirits in the world, imperturbable good temper, and an unconscious practical philosophy that defied the devil care and all his works. And well it was that he found such agreeable companions, for time flowed on, and no summons arrived to call him to his grandfather's presence, and no herald to announce his grandfather's advent. The ladies and Coningsby had exhausted badinage. They had examined and criticised all the furniture, had rifled the vases of their prettiest flowers, and Clotilde, who had already sung several times, was proposing a duet to Ermengarde, when a servant entered and told the ladies that a carriage was in attendance to give them an airing, and after that Lord Monmouth hoped they would return and dine with him. Then, turning to Coningsby, he informed him, with his lord's compliments, that Lord Monmouth was sorry he was too much engaged to see him. Nothing was to be done but to put a tolerably good face on it. 'Embrace Lord Monmouth for me,' said Coningsby to his fair friends, 'and tell him I think it is very unkind that he did not ask me to dinner with you.' Coningsby said this with a gay air, but really with a depressed spirit. He felt convinced that his grandfather was deeply displeased with him, and as he rode away from the villa he could not resist the strong impression that he was destined never to re-enter it. Yet it was decreed otherwise. It so happened that the idle message which Coningsby had left for his grandfather, and which he never seriously supposed for a moment that his late companions would have given their host, operated entirely in his favour. Whatever were the feelings with respect to Coningsby at the bottom of Lord Monmouth's heart, he was actuated in his refusal to see him not more from displeasure than from an anticipatory horror of something like a scene. Even a surrender from Coningsby without terms, and an offer to declare himself a candidate for Darlford, or to do anything else that his grandfather wished, would have been disagreeable to Lord Monmouth in his present mood. As in politics, a revolution is often followed by a season of torpor, so, in the case of Lord Monmouth, the separation from his wife, which had for a long period occupied his meditation, was succeeded by a vein of mental dissipation. He did not wish to be reminded by any thing or any person that he had still in some degree the misfortune of being a responsible member of society. He wanted to be surrounded by individuals who were above or below the conventional interests of what is called the world. He wanted to hear nothing of those painful and embarrassing influences which, from our contracted experience and want of enlightenment, we magnify into such undue importance. For this purpose he wished to have about him persons whose knowledge of the cares of life concerned only the means of existence, and whose sense of its objects referred only to the sources of enjoyment; persons who had not been educated in the idolatry of respectability, that is to say, of realising such an amount of what is termed character by a hypocritical deference to the prejudices of the community as may enable them, at suitable times and under convenient circumstances and disguises, to plunder the public. This was the Monmouth philosophy. With these feelings, Lord Monmouth recoiled at this moment from grandsons and relations and ties of all kinds. He did not wish to be reminded of his identity, but to swim unmolested and undisturbed in his Epicurean dream. When, therefore, his fair visitors, Clotilde, who opened her mouth only to breathe roses and diamonds, and Ermengarde, who was so good-natured that she sacrificed even her lovers to her friends, saw him merely to exclaim at the same moment, and with the same voices of thrilling joyousness, "Why did not you ask him to dinner?" And then, without waiting for his reply, entered with that rapidity of elocution which French women can alone command into the catalogue of his charms and accomplishments, Lord Monmouth began to regret that he really had not seen Coningsby, who, it appeared, might have greatly contributed to the pleasure of the day. The message which was duly given, however, settled the business. Lord Monmouth felt that any chance of explanations, or even allusions to the past, was out of the question; and, to defend himself from the accusations of his animated guests, he said, "Well, he shall come to dine with you next time." There is no end to the influence of woman on our life. It is at the bottom of everything that happens to us. And so it was that, in spite of all the combinations of Lucretia and Mr. Rigby, and the mortification and resentment of Lord Monmouth, the favourable impression he casually made on a couple of French actresses occasioned Coningsby, before a month had elapsed since his memorable interview at Monmouth House, to receive an invitation again to dine with his grandfather. The party was agreeable. Clotilde and Ermengarde had wits as sparkling as their eyes. There was a manager of the opera, a great friend of Villebecque, and his wife, a splendid lady, who had been a prima donna of celebrity, and still had a commanding voice for a chamber; a Carlist nobleman, who lived upon his traditions, and who, though without a sou, could tell of a festival given by his family before the Revolution, which had cost 1,000,000 of francs; and a Neapolitan physician, in whom Lord Monmouth had great confidence, and who himself believed in the elixir vitae, made up the party, with Lucian Gay, Coningsby, and Mr. Rigby. Our hero remarked that Villebecque on this occasion sat at the bottom of the table, but Flora did not appear. In the meantime, the month which brought about this satisfactory and at one time unexpected result was fruitful also in other circumstances still more interesting. Coningsby and Edith met frequently, if to breathe the same atmosphere in the same crowded saloons can be described as meeting; ever watching each other's movements, and yet studious never to encounter each other's glance. The charms of Miss Millbank had become a universal topic. They were celebrated in ballrooms, they were discussed at clubs. Edith was the beauty of the season. All admired her; many sighed even to express their admiration; but the devotion of Lord Beaumanoir, who always hovered about her, deterred them from a rivalry which might have made the boldest despair. As for Coningsby, he passed his life principally with the various members of the Sydney family, and was almost daily riding with Lady Everingham and her sister, generally accompanied by Lord Henry and his friend Eustace Lyle, between whom, indeed, and Coningsby, there were relations of intimacy scarcely less inseparable. Coningsby had spoken to Lady Everingham of the rumoured marriage of her elder brother, and found, although the family had not yet been formally apprised of it, she entertained little doubt of its ultimate occurrence. She admired Miss Millbank, with whom her acquaintance continued slight, and she wished, of course, that her brother should marry and be happy. 'But Percy is often in love,' she would add, 'and never likes us to be very intimate with his inamoratas. He thinks it destroys the romance, and that domestic familiarity may compromise his heroic character. However,' she added, 'I really believe that will be a match.' On the whole, though he bore a serene aspect to the world, Coningsby passed this month in a state of restless misery. His soul was brooding on one subject, and he had no confidant. He could not resist the spell that impelled him to the society where Edith might at least be seen, and the circle in which he lived was one in which her name was frequently mentioned. Alone, in his solitary rooms in the Albany, he felt all his desolation, and often a few minutes before he figured in the world, apparently followed and courted by all, he had been plunged in the darkest fits of irremediable wretchedness. He had, of course, frequently met Lady Wallinger, but their salutations, though never omitted, and on each side cordial, were brief. There seemed to be a tacit understanding between them not to refer to a subject fruitful in painful reminiscences. The season waned. In the fulfilment of a project originally formed in the playing fields of Eton, often recurred to at Cambridge, and cherished with the fondness which men cling to a scheme of early youth, Coningsby, Henry Sidney, Vere, and Buckhurst had engaged some moors together this year, and in a few days they were about to quit town for Scotland. They had pressed Eustace Lyle to accompany them, but he, who in general seemed to have no pleasure greater than their society, had surprised them by declining their invitation with some vague mention that he rather thought he should go abroad. It was the last day of July, and all the world were at a breakfast given at a fanciful cottage situate in a beautiful garden on the banks of the Thames by Lady Everingham. The weather was as bright as the romances of Boccaccio. There were pyramids of strawberries in bowls colossal enough to hold orange trees, and the choicest band filled the air with enchanting strains, while a brilliant multitude sauntered on turf like velvet, or roamed in desultory existence amid the quivering shades of winding walks. 'My fate was prophetic,' said Lady Everingham, when she saw Coningsby. 'I am glad it is connected with an incident. It gives it a point.' 'You are mystical as well as prophetic. Tell me what we are to celebrate.' 'Theresa is going to be married.' 'Then I too will prophesy and name the hero of the romance, Eustace Lyle.' 'You have been more prescient than I,' said Lady Everingham, 'perhaps because I was thinking too much of some one else.' 'It seems to me a union which all must acknowledge perfect. I hardly know which I love best. I have had my suspicions a long time, and when Eustace refused to go to the moors with us, though I said nothing, I was convinced.' 'At any rate,' said Lady Everingham, sighing, with a rather smiling face, 'we are kinsfolk, Mr. Coningsby, though I would gladly have wished to have been more.' 'Were those your thoughts, dear lady? Ever kind to me! Happiness,' he added in a mournful tone, 'I fear can never be mine.' 'And why?' 'Ah! 'tis a tale too strange and sorrowful for a day when, like Seged, we must all determine to be happy.' 'You have already made me miserable.' 'Here comes a group that will make you gay,' said Coningsby, as he moved on. Edith and the Wallingers, accompanied by Lord Beaumanoir, Mr. Melton, and Sir Charles Buckhurst, formed the party. They seemed profuse in their congratulations to Lady Everingham, having already learnt the intelligence from her brother. Coningsby stopped to talk to Lady St. Julians, who had still a daughter to marry. Both Augustina, who was at Coningsby Castle, and Clara Isabella, who ought to have been there, had each secured the right man. But Adelaide Victoria had now appeared, and Lady St. Julians had a great regard for the favourite grandson of Lord Monmouth, and also for the influential friend of Lord Vere and Sir Charles Buckhurst. In case Coningsby did not determine to become her son-in-law himself, he might counsel either of his friends to a judicious decision on an inevitable act. 'Strawberries and cream?' said Lord Eskdale to Mr. Ormsby, who seemed occupied with some delicacies. 'Egad, no, those days are past. I think there is a little easterly wind with all this fine appearance.' 'I am for indoor nature myself,' said Lord Eskdale. 'Do you know, I do not half like the way Monmouth is going on. He never gets out of that villa of his. He should change his air more. Tell him.' 'It is no use telling him anything. Have you heard anything of Milady?' 'I had a letter from her to day. She writes in good spirits. I am sorry it broke up, and yet I never thought it would last so long.' 'I gave them 2 years,' said Mr. Ormsby. 'Lord Monmouth lived with his first wife 2 years, and afterwards with the Mirandola at Milan, at least nearly 2 years. It was 1 year and 10 months. I must know, for he called me in to settle affairs. I took the lady to the baths of Lucca, on the pretence that Monmouth would meet us there. He went to Paris. All his great affairs have been 2 years. I remember I wanted to bet Cassilis at White's on it when he married. But I thought, being his intimate friend, the oldest friend he has, indeed, and one of his trustees, it was perhaps as well not to do it.' 'You should have made the bet with himself,' said Lord Eskdale, 'and then there never would have been a separation.' 'Ha, ha, ha! Do you know, I feel the wind.' About an hour after this, Coningsby, who had just quitted the Duchess, met, on a terrace by the river, Lady Wallinger, walking with Mrs. Guy Flouncey and a Russian prince, whom that lady was enchanting. Coningsby was about to pass with some slight courtesy, but Lady Wallinger stopped and would speak to him on slight subjects, the weather and the fete, but yet adroitly enough managed to make him turn and join her. Mrs. Guy Flouncey walked on a little before with her Russian admirer. Lady Wallinger followed with Coningsby. 'The match that has been proclaimed to day has greatly surprised me,' said Lady Wallinger. 'Indeed!' said Coningsby. 'I confess I was long prepared for it. And it seems to me the most natural alliance conceivable, and one that every one must approve.' 'Lady Everingham seems much surprised by it.' 'Ah! Lady Everingham is a brilliant personage, and cannot deign to observe obvious circumstances.' 'Do you know, Mr. Coningsby, that I always thought you were engaged to Lady Theresa?' 'I!' 'Indeed, we were informed more than a month ago that you were positively going to be married to her.' 'I am not one of those who can shift their affections with such rapidity, Lady Wallinger.' Lady Wallinger looked distressed. 'You remember our meeting, you on the stairs at House, Mr. Coningsby?' 'Painfully. It is deeply graven on my brain.' 'Edith had just been informed that you were going to be married to Lady Theresa.' 'Not surely by him to whom she is herself going to be married,' said Coningsby, reddening. 'I am not aware that she is going to be married to any one. Lord Beaumanoir admires her, has always admired her. But Edith has given him no encouragement, at least gave him no encouragement as long as she believed. But why dwell on such an unhappy subject, Mr. Coningsby? I am to blame. I have been to blame perhaps before, but indeed I think it cruel, very cruel, that Edith and you are kept asunder. You have always been my best, my dearest friend, and are the most amiable and admirable of women. But tell me, is it indeed true that Edith is not going to be married?' At this moment Mrs. Guy Flouncey turned round, and assuring Lady Wallinger that the Prince and herself had agreed to refer some point to her about the most transcendental ethics of flirtation, this deeply interesting conversation was arrested, and Lady Wallinger, with becoming suavity, was obliged to listen to the lady's lively appeal of exaggerated nonsense, and the Prince's affected protests, while Coningsby walked by her side, pale and agitated, and then offered his arm to Lady Wallinger, which she accepted with an affectionate pressure. At the end of the terrace they met some other guests, and soon were immersed in the multitude that thronged the lawn. 'There is Sir Joseph,' said Lady Wallinger, and Coningsby looked up and saw Edith on his arm. They were unconsciously approaching them. Lord Beaumanoir was there, but he seemed to shrink into nothing to day before Buckhurst, who was captivated for the moment by Edith, and hearing that no knight was resolute enough to try a fall with the Marquess, was impelled by his talent for action to enter the lists. He had talked down everybody, unhorsed every cavalier, nobody had a chance against him, he answered all your questions before you asked them, contradicted everybody with the intrepidity of a Rigby, annihilated your anecdotes by historiettes infinitely more piquant, and if anybody chanced to make a joke which he could not excel, declared immediately that it was a Joe Miller. He was absurd, extravagant, grotesque, noisy; but he was young, rattling, and interesting from his health and spirits. Edith was extremely amused by him, and was encouraging by her smile his spiritual excesses, when they all suddenly met Lady Wallinger and Coningsby. The eyes of Edith and Coningsby met for the first time since they so cruelly encountered on the staircase of House. A deep quick blush suffused her face, her eyes gleamed with a sudden coruscation, and suddenly and quickly she put forth her hand. Yes, he presses once more that hand which permanently to retain is the passion of his life, yet which may never be his. It seemed that for the ravishing delight of that moment he could have borne with cheerfulness all the dark and harrowing misery of the year he had passed away since he embraced her in the woods of Hellingsley and pledged his faith by the waters of the rushing Darl. He seized the occasion which offered itself, a moment to walk by her side and to snatch some brief instants of unreserved communion. 'Forgive me,' she said. 'Ah! how could you ever doubt me?' said Coningsby. 'I was unhappy. And now we are to each other as before? And will be, come what come may.' End of Chapter 7. End of Book 8.